A good group already. How you doing there, Mike? All right?
I'm good, thanks, Dan. Yeah,
Yeah,
good to be back.
yeah, absolutely. So when I saw you earlier, I wanted to just check to see whether you've had a haircut, and you haven't had a haircut yet.
It's getting proper big. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I'm gonna have to have something done this week. It's
I
it's going to be a number 2 all over. I think something like that. I
brilliant.
don't think I'll get away with a number 1 like
Not
I
yet,
used to.
no.
Yeah.
So, welcome, guys. If you've just joined us, myself and Mike are talking about haircuts. I heard a report on Radio 2 the other day about illegal and illicit hairdressing and people meeting clients outside of supermarkets and then ushering them into their boudoirs under surveillance to get a secret haircut. People illegally visiting people's houses, and I thought it's just shows how crazy times are when you're listening to a BBC Radio 2 report on illegal haircutting. It's just a sign of time's gone mad. And we've gone mad, Mike, because we've decided to tackle the hot topic, controversial topic of flexibility tonight, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Well, actually, you have. It was your idea. I just got dragged along.
yeah. So afterwards, I was like, should we have done that? Should we have done that? But no, it should. It should be hopefully an interesting discussion. Yeah.
Well, we're doing it now. It's like we're riding down a hill with no brakes, so we've just got to steer ourselves into the slow lane and see if we come out of this with, hopefully, guys, your support. So tonight's session, we really want some interaction and some questions and opinions as well, because I'm sure you'll agree, Mike, there are a lot of opinions out there regarding flexibility. Yes, there's research, and we can talk about that and lean on the research tonight, but there's also a lot of personal opinion. I know some of you will engage in a lot of flexibility type and style of training and find that really works for you. And I know that there's others out there who won't really engage in much flexibility and don't feel that it offers them much in terms of supporting their fitness and their performance, or even just the psychological resolve they look from their exercise. What I mean by that is some people find stretching very therapeutic and relaxing, and others find it just painful and awkward to do. And I think if you fall into one of those preference categories, then obviously that will bias your opinion towards this type of modality as well. We've got a few questions to pose to get things started. Mike's got some questions and I've got some questions as well. So Mike, do you want to start off with your first thing that you'd made a note of there?
Well, I just kind of put some topics down really for just for general discussion. So one of the things that, because I've been listening to some other podcasts and reading some papers and stuff over the last week since we decided to do this, and one of the things was about architectural changes in the muscle, and one of the reasons for flexibility for improving, if that is a kind of adjective for it, whether it does actually improve the architecture and what changes it has, and then whether that actually makes any difference at all. So have you had a read of those as well, Dan? Have you had a look at the stuff to do with architecture?
Yes, in particular, is it the Sarcomere Genesis?
That's it. Yeah.
That's one of was the word of the day. So yeah, this is quite exciting in terms of what's happening on a structural level. It's this idea that you can increase the in-series sarcomeres so that you actually do have a lengthened tissue, you do have a lengthened muscle as a result of this, but also that with the increased sarcomeres in series, that means you've got an increased contractile range as well within the muscle. And when we talk about improving length, I think that's really what we are talking about, improving the length via that mechanism. But a lot of the time when we're stretching, we feel we're achieving length, of increasing the length of the muscle, but actually we're not structurally increasing the length, although we may be increasing the range of movement, which of course are two different things. So we can talk about that tonight and what's actually happening when we talk about flexibility training as well. We've got one listener who has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a collagenous irregularity where people have an increase in flexibility and an increase in elastin in their tissues, and is often known as hypermobility, or being double jointed is a very kind of layman's term for it as well. So yeah, I mean, that's the other end of the spectrum, isn't it? People who are too flexible versus people who are, you know, inflexible. And people may be inflexible from joint degenerative changes. They may be inflexible from joint replacements. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got conditions that lead people to be too flexible, and it's in their interests to almost reduce their flexibility in order to improve their function and reduce pain as well.
Yeah. I think sometimes when obviously you don't know the ins and outs of people's medical conditions. Sometimes when you're kind of in the gym, you see someone and they look really, really flexible, and you think that you should be able to have that level of flexibility as well. And quite often it's I mean, you can stretch as much as you like, but if you're trying to compare yourself to someone who has a condition like that, you've got no chance of ever reaching that level of range of motion because of just your genetics, and that can be a big hurdle for people, I think, to mentally get their head around, because they feel that they should be able to do it. And they can see other people doing it, but they try to get there, and they'll just never ever get there.
Absolutely. I think the classic one, Mike, is the toe touching, isn't it? When you talk about flexibility, people automatically think about whether they can or cannot touch the toes. If they can touch the toes, they are flexible, and if they can't touch the toes, then they are, you know, inflexible. It's that sort of very basic marker and measure of it. But as you said, there's many things that can contribute to whether you can touch your toes or not, due to your you know, your body shape as well. Long legs, short torso versus longer torso, short legs, shorter, taller. And then there's your exercise history as well. You know, whether you spent a lot of time on a bicycle using your hamstrings in a shortened pattern, or whether you've spent more time doing general exercise, and, you know, maintaining flexibility there can really make a difference. So yeah, I think there's a lot of I think it's a bit like posture, isn't it, Mike? Where people think that, you know, good posture, bad posture, and people think flexible, inflexible, and it's that clear. Whereas I think it really can make a big difference. One of the things I wanted to mention tonight was to do with this idea of I've got a few slides here actually. Should I see if they'll pop up now?
Yeah, great.
The wheel is still spinning. That's not a good sign.
Oh, okay, that's not a good sign.
It's only one slide. Let me try that again. No, never mind. Let me come back to the chat. So one of the things I was going to say is, can you be too flexible? Why is the wheel spinning? Can we come back to us, Mike?
Just try now. Hold on. I just stopped that one. There we go. That was from last week.
One of the questions I had on there was, can you be is a lack of flexibility bad? That's what I was going to say. Is a lack of flexibility bad? So if you take hamstrings as a classic one, a lot of people would say they have tight hamstrings. Well, is that inherently bad to have tight hamstrings? If we think about the job role of the hamstrings, and I'm not talking about flexing the knee or extending the hip, obviously they do that, but the job role of the hamstrings in terms of control, protection, or even injury prevention is very much based around the knee. And we know that the hamstrings work dynamically, and they would work well if there was a knee which was ACL deficient, for example. The hamstrings control that glide of the tibia, and therefore tight hamstrings, or should we say hamstrings which are as tight as they should be, will help to control the knee, will help to protect the passive structures. And just stretching the hamstring so it's more flexible and you know, can achieve a greater length is not necessarily in the best interests of protecting the passive structures of the knee, for example. So, I mean, yeah, that's one of the things. And, you know, we can think about other areas where if a muscle is required to work in shortened positions, then surely working and functioning in those shortened positions is going to be much more beneficial than just trying to stretch the muscle when actually you predominantly use it in a shortened position, it really doesn't make much sense to be continuously trying to lengthen the muscle when you don't use it in that lengthened range of motion. If you do use it in that lengthened range of motion, well, that's a different thing. That raises the question as to if you use the muscle in a lengthened position in order to try and improve your performance or just do normal day-to-day functions or even to try and reduce injury, then is it a good idea just to stretch the muscle? Because you need to have strength in those outer lengthened ranges, but you also need to have motor control in those outer lengthened ranges if you're going to look to try and reduce injury as well. So just doing a static stretch of an area really doesn't do much to help with strength or with the motor control elements as well, which brings us on to the strengthening element, Mike, which I'll let you talk a little bit about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's all come around as well from the old kind of sayings about injury prevention with stretching. So that there seem to, I mean, and it is shifting now, but certainly when I very first learned, you had to stretch and the role of stretching was to help prevent injury. So if you had this increase in range of motion, then it would be somewhat protective against potential injury. But we know that that's unlikely to be the case. I think there are a couple of studies where it showed that you can have some injury prevention benefits from doing a pre-workout stretch, but it's for a very specific population, and it's kind of like it may help. That the evidence for it is certainly not very strong, and I think a lot of it has come from that. I mean, if you think about, because both you and I have taught the old gym instructor PT courses before, and it's part of the syllabus even now still to put warm-up stretches in the programming, and you have to do it for everything, and that kind of doctrine is still taught now, and that's I think that's one of the big things that needs to change, is that early level education. But then I guess what you've got to, because different people see stretching as different things as well, and in my mind stretching is the old static stretching where you just stand still and you stretch it, whereas some people then get that confused, or the word stretching or flexibility confused within dynamic stretching. And for me, dynamic stretching is just a warm-up. That isn't stretching, that's moving. And you're kind of moving, you would move the body and prepare the body for whatever activity it is you're going to do. So in my mind, that wouldn't be stretching. So I think the kind of definition of it has been blurred a bit as well across the disciplines.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
We've had sorry, mate, carry on. Had a few comments come through, so I'll read through those if you want to carry on.
That's all right. I was just going to try and upload my my presentation again. It looks like a Poppy and co have started an Earlos Danlos group whilst we've been chatting, so we've created a new Facebook group, I think.
Yay, good. Yeah,
don't forget us, guys, when you've got like 1,000 members.
That I know Bonnie's done a couple of our talks before, and I've known Bonnie for years, and she runs a Facebook page all to do with hypermobility and exercise. Really good, very good. She obviously lived with it. And used to be a ballet dancer, a very good ballet dancer, and but Bonnie's a brilliant person to chat to about EDS. Definitely, I've learned a lot from Bonnie, chatting about the condition. So she's definitely someone to keep in touch with. Peter's asked a question. So what about people firing muscles on the reduced end of range? Isn't stretching helping to prevent injury in this case? I'm not sure what that means, Peter. So people fire a muscle on the reduced end of range. So if you lack the extensibility and then you need to contract in that position, I think that's what it's saying there. Okay, so I mean, for me, what I would do because for me that there's very limited benefit to stretch, and it takes ages to get the benefits that you do get from static stretching. I think you need to do a consistent program for months to have any kind of long-lasting changes in flexibility. And you either need to start very early as your body's developing, have a connective tissue disorder, or spend years trying to increase your flexibility. So if that was me wanting to do that with an athlete who needed strength at end of range, then I would be working on eccentric contractions at end of range, and that would have a knock-on effect then of also increasing flexibility. So you get the kind of double whammy. Then you get your strength gains, which is protective of injury. We know that. Plus you get your increase in range of motion. So yeah, that's the kind of thing that I would do there, Peter. Would there anything different from you, Dan?
No, that's what I would do as well, to work in and to control those end of ranges. And just to add to that, the eccentrics would be a preferred way to go about doing it, but you could also add in some isometrics as well. And yeah, I'm not saying you should do one over the other. I think eccentrics are better, but I would probably add in a little bit of both and mix up the isometrics with the eccentrics. And of course, you're going to have concentrics to bring yourself back to where you started as well. So mixing it all up, but it's generally thought that the eccentric element of that gives you the most bang for your buck. And I was just briefly looking over some research before we jumped on this call just a couple of hours ago. And to get the sarcomere genesis, this lengthening of the muscles, it does take a considered effort over some time, but some research suggested it only takes up to 3 weeks. 3 weeks of 3 sessions a week can start to bring about these positive changes. So if you can build it into your strengthening program, then you should soon see some increased gains in strength. What we call it strengthening through lengthening is a great way of trying to remember it, because you're strengthening and stretching at the same time, but getting so much more out of it than just sitting doing a static stretch. So yeah.
Definitely. I wondered when Ian would mention this. So I've met Ian on a couple of rock tape courses before, and I know he's into his martial arts. So he said, any recommendations for karate or jiu-jitsu? I wondered when that was coming. Yeah, I would do.
I think Ian's a bit more than just into his martial arts. I think Ian's. I know Ian's. I'm pretty confident Ian's a black belt. How many Dan? Yeah. How many Dan is, if we're talking about the right disciplines here? Ian will probably tell us how many Dan he is in a moment, or tell me his level without being modest, Ian, because I know he's quite a ninja as well. I think he does maybe stick stuff and all sorts. Anyway, we're at a safe distance, 2 meters away. Whoa, Ian.
Dan. Whoa, okay, yeah, okay. He's a good friend to have. Yeah,
yeah.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there as well with the timing. So you spend a lot of weeks going into months if you're following a stretching routine, and this is the thing as well. So why do you stretch in the first place? And you stretch because you feel tight, but what is tightness? Yeah, so and that's the thing, because it's again, like thinking back years ago, I think that tightness is a shortened muscle. That's what I would think. And then you stretch it, and then you change the structure of the muscle. But we know that that's not the case. You're going to see increases in range of motion very quickly after doing stretching, and we know that we can't change the structure of muscle that quickly. Yeah, so it has to be done over time. So there must be something going on with your body to allow you that increase in range, rather than it being a physical change in the structure of the tissue.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. So what we should discuss what that's likely to be, what those neurological effects are that allow you to stretch further without obviously the structure of the muscle increasing. It's almost like the muscle wasn't tight and then you lengthened it. It's more like the muscle was in a bad mood and then you just convinced it to ease up a bit and give you a bit more length.
This is it. Yeah, it's like the kind of pushing into pain, isn't it? And I guess the feeling of tightness, however that's perceived by the individual, is a protective mechanism. So your body's just alerting you to the fact that you're reaching not the end of your range, because we know that you can go further, but you're approaching an area where your body's not very comfortable with being there. So and if you go through it, then it's going to cause you an injury if you go through it quickly. But if you nudge the edge of it, then it will start to allow you to go. Yeah, it will give you that green light to move a little bit more. Yeah.
So there's a few mechanisms at play there. If I just mention one of the most basic ones, is that you develop more of a tolerance to the stretch. It's a bit like the stretch causes you some discomfort and some pain, and if you maintain that, then you get some habituation, and you literally just tolerate the feeling of that stretch, or you tolerate the discomfort to the point where you can tolerate more of it, and therefore stretch further into that range of motion. That's the basic one. And then of course there's the classic stretch reflex as well, which if you trigger the stretch reflex, it has that effect of causing the muscle contraction and stops you going further. And of course there are many things that can increase the sensitivity of the stretch reflex, including the autonomic nervous system's regulation, and including its link with breathing. But we also know that we can decrease the sensitivity of the stretch reflex by somewhat giving it a bit of stimulus and just maintaining that stimulus and getting that habituation, so that then you can stretch further, because the stretch reflex has been dampened and reduced, and you can then go into, and we use that with, contract, relax, MET, PNF, whatever you want to call it, in order to increase the range of motion. But that's not to be confused with the actual lengthening that we're looking to achieve from the eccentrics and from prolonged stretching as well. Prolonged continual stretching can lead to that lengthening, that true tissue lengthening, but that does take concerted effort and some time, and is not the sort of thing that happens when you do a few sessions of stretching and then give it a miss for a few sessions. You're not going to get that adaptation. If we talk about specific sports or activities, and particularly martial arts, Mike, I mean, that's one surely where stretching has a much bigger part to play than it would do in, say, weightlifting or cycling, for example. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I get if someone's done martial arts from a very early age, and they've taken their body through those ranges of motion very early on, and they've maintained that training then all the way through their adult life, that they will maintain that flexibility for as long as they carry on doing it. And I mean, especially with martial art, the martial artists that I've known have been extremely strong as well. So not only do they do stretching routines, but they do a hell of a lot of strength at end of range as well. And I think it's kind of best of both worlds. Like you said before, it's it's whatever is needed for that individual. So if they train that way, and and their body allows them to go through those ranges of motion, then it's going to be fine for them to do it. I think the problem comes when you've got someone who's a sixth Dan, and then they're able to do spinning kicks and kick your head off, and then I give it a go and I will pull my hamstring. There is no way that I'll be able to get that range of motion. I've not done that since I was 5-6 years old, so there is no way that I'd be able to do that now.
I tried it once and almost knocked my sister out. she was quite tall as well, so I didn't manage to kick high enough, and so the last time I did that, I got in trouble.
But it has to be individualized, and then you've got the people. So like you said with cycling, so cycling, you're in a position where your hamstrings never ever get to even an extended knee position because of the setup on the bike. So doing a stretching routine for a cyclist would be pointless. That they don't need that additional
range. Well, that's interesting you should say that, and I'm gonna disagree. Don't hit the red button. So I did a lot of cycling and training to a reasonable level when I was younger. And so on one hand, stretching the hamstrings would seem pointless, right? Because of the reasons that you've just stated. However, when you look at a cyclist who wants to get more aerodynamic, they've got to really tuck themselves down, increase the flexion through the hip, increase the demands through the hamstring. And what can happen is the hamstrings can get sort of used to working in this dynamic range, so they can effectively feel, they feel tight. There's no two ways about it. They feel tight. And then when you want to get down into that tuck down aerodynamic position, that's a little bit more alien because you spent a lot more time in more of an upright position. So what can then happen is you're using the hamstrings at their end of comfortable range, and you have that, they're not used to working in that range, but also you can limit your ability to get down into that aerodynamic position, and you end up using more energy trying to pull yourself into that position because you've got these tight hamstrings. So by targeting the hamstrings and giving them a little bit of a stretch, literally over a session or two, you can much more comfortably get down into the aero position. And if you can get into the aero position more comfortably and sit in it more comfortably, then you're not expending energy trying to uncomfortably hold yourself in that position as well. Having said that, just stretching the hamstrings, all the time for a cyclist is not the most efficient way of them using their time. But it can be a good way of actually increasing power output if it allows them to get into positions where they can generate more power and sit in those positions in more comfort as well.
Yeah, I should have qualified what I said, because I get that completely. And if you can kind of anteriorly tilt the pelvis, so then you get that lengthening of the hamstrings there, so at the proximal end. But then that's it. That's all you would need. That's what I mean. So, but then if you go beyond that and try to lengthen it, like you would if you were in martial arts, then that additional range for that cyclist, they would never use it in their sport.
No.
So you would never. Yes, you would want to be able to get into a comfortable aero position, but then beyond that, I think would be for their sport. Maybe not for life, but for their sport wouldn't be as beneficial.
No.
I'd suggest. But.
No, quite right. I'd say there's quite a discrepancy here with our listeners, because on the one hand we've got some of our listeners, Sarah and Bonnie, with the air loss, Dan loss, but then also on the other end we've got some sports people, particularly Ian, who's not necessarily looking to increase his range of motion, because I would assume that it's already excellent, but he's certainly looking to maintain it, whereas we've got the air loss, Dan loss, where they're looking to potentially tighten and stabilize and control the joints, as opposed to increasing the range of motion. So looking for different things really when it comes to flexibility. One almost looking to reduce the flexibility and to control and to tighten, and then on the other end of the spectrum looking to increase and maintain those ranges of motion as well. So just people looking for different things from their flexibility as well.
There was a good comment.
There was a comment. We missed one actually, Mike, and so Poppy, I think we've missed a couple from Poppy.
Sorry, Poppy.
We are sorry. Let me just go back, Poppy, and see, because she's got the red Q next to that. Oh, that's Mark.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Poppy mentioned about, sorry to embarrass you, Poppy, but you mentioned about butt clenching, which you didn't use those words, but that is a term which I've heard before, butt clenches. And so what's happening there is the tensing up of the bum. One can come from in a way to try and stabilize. It can also come from Instagram and people seeing images of and just trying to sort of tense their bums all the time, in the same way that Mike and I might try and hold our tummies in when we go to the beach. Maybe I speak for myself, Mike. You've got your own gym there. I'm sure you're rock solid. So the butt clenching element, I touched upon that when we talked about hips, because it can affect the way that the hip moves as well. And it can sometimes cause a bit of anterior hip irritation if you're always tensing your butt, because it slightly upsets the natural balancing of the muscles around the hip as well. And the bum muscles aren't designed to be tensed all the time either. So you talked about needing to get your core working more, and the core, of course, being the pelvic floor, the diaphragm, and the muscles around the abdominal and core region. So it's really muscle exercises which can activate those muscles, which can be a challenge. I think I'll make a recommendation and then see if Mike can add to it. I'd suggest that it's probably a good idea to get into a relaxed position. So to lie on the floor, to take away other concerns such as, not worrying about your balance or anything else, to lie on the floor, to get control of your breathing, just to get your breathing relaxed. So you're not breath holding or taking a deep breath, making sure that you're doing diaphragmatic abdominal breathing, particularly because you mentioned about having an autonomic dysfunction further up. I don't know the details of that, but sometimes if you have that, your breathing regulation may benefit from some attention. And if you're not sure about that, have a look on the Physio channel. There's some videos on there to do with breathing, which are quite helpful, just to save me going into it now. But to help you engage those muscles around your core, I would look to try and engage those with some conscious effort, but being careful not to go into that clenching element again. So you're not trying to tense up the muscles 100%. You're not trying to, get them to get strong, or to get them to be hypertrophic. You're just trying to increase the mind to muscle connection. So the muscle contractions are sub-level, sub-maximal. You're just trying to connect your brain to the muscles. There's already a connection there. You just need to strengthen it. What the nerves which fire together wire together. So the more you practice, the stronger those connections will be. And you just want those sub-maximal, controlled, therapeutic switch on and off, not tense. So there's no breath holding, there's no grimacing. It's just switching those muscles on and off and just feeling and getting control with them. And you can use a bit of biofeedback. All that is touching the area that you're tensing. So if you put your thumbs in your lower abdomen, just off the front of your pelvis, for example, you can feel the muscles in there. So you maybe a transverse abdominis, that flat one which goes across the bottom of your abdomen, and you can then just do some contracting and relaxing. I'm not using the word tense here because you don't really want to tense it up so that you can't breathe properly, but you just want to contract and relax those muscles and start to get control of them. And when you can do that in a lying down position, including your pelvic floor muscles as well, then progress to a seated position or a standing position and just stand relaxed and just practice switching those muscles on and off just to get control of them. And that should be a good stepping stone towards switching those muscles on. The other side of the coin is to relax your glutes as well. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Mike, from your
that's exactly where I would start with. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Especially if there's some kind of autonomic condition that it's I like what you said about the gentle contraction. I liken it to a dimmer switch. So you just want to just the first bit of the dimmer switch on, and it reminds the muscle what it's like to be calm rather than always on. And it's trying to, like you said, just trying to get that that mind muscle link back to the control element of it rather than just on all the time. Yeah,
absolutely,
exactly the same. That's good. And then I think Helena said, are you saying that flexibility can only be improved to a certain degree after a certain age, please? No, I think you can improve your flexibility no matter how old you are. It just takes a long time when you're older. And also there are probably better ways of increasing your flexibility than stretching, in my opinion. I would, as we mentioned before, doing the especially if you're older, doing the eccentric lengthening contractions under load, you're going to get the benefits of an increased range, that sarcomere genesis, and you're going to get stronger. So you reduce the likelihood of sarcopenia. So you've got that. You've got the double whammy. Yeah, and especially if you're more advanced in years, but you can still improve. Well, depending on the structure, like Dan mentioned earlier, if there are arthritic changes, then we may have there may be limits to the range that will be available. But if there are no other reasons why you can't get there, then yes, you can improve the flexibility when you're older. It's just the way that you do it, I think.
As long as there's not a bony block towards, in your movement, as long as there's a softer end feel, and if it feels like a stretch, then it's a stretch. If it feels like a squash or a bony kind of blocking and buttressing up of a joint, then obviously that's something different. You're not gonna budge a joint out the way, but you can certainly help with the flexibility elements. So I just brought up my slide here. I know you guys can't see it, but we've actually been through all of the key questions. But one of them at the top was a slightly less academic question, and that's the question was, why do you want to stretch? And that's one of the questions I wanted to start with, but I guess we can finish off with that is although we talk here, Mike, about the science and stretching is better for some people than others, it's why do you want to stretch? And I think that if you want to stretch because you just want to, because it feels good, and why not? I think that's a perfectly good reason to do this, to stretch, is just because it feels good. If you drop down on the floor and do a hamstring stretch, or stand up against a pole and do some kind of calf stretch, if it feels good, then great, because what it is movement. It's classed as exercise, it's movement. We all know that, the people that we generally, our patients, us, everybody doesn't move enough. And, just doing a stretch is good. If it feels good, then do it and keep doing it. If it doesn't feel good, then you can start to question whether it's a reasonable thing to do or not. Yeah. So stretching just for stretching's sake, I think is perfectly fine.
And with your tendon background as well, when would you not advocate stretching?
Well, a lot of people, when the research comes out looking at stretching regarding tendons, I think a lot of people thought that stretching tendons is bad, but actually what it is more of a waste of time rather than bad. Mm-hmm. So if you've got an Achilles tendon issue and your therapist has advised you to stretch it, and you spent the last 8 weeks stretching it, what you've likely done is wasted a lot of time. You haven't likely done any damage apart from the missed opportunity for doing some better things. You haven't done any active damage from stretching. You've just done damage from not doing, what you should have been doing or what you could have been doing. That being said, a slight caveat is that, as we always discuss when we talk about tendons, is that there can also be an element of compression. So if you're stretching your hamstrings to try and alleviate upper hamstring tendinopathy, then you may be causing some compression of that hamstring tendon up against your ischial tuberosity bum bone, and therefore that might cause some further irritation. But that's not so much stretching, that's just the biomechanical position you've put yourself into, which is causing some compression, which is going to be just probably aggravating at worst. But if you've got patellar tendinopathy, then stretching your quads is not bad, but it's not where the answer lies. It may do nothing. It may give you some relief. It's unlikely to make it worse. But if that's all you're doing, then you're really missing all the opportunity to do some of the better things. So I think stretching tendons is generally not very helpful, and you should be doing much more effective things. However, if it feels good and it helps, then add it to your program.
Yeah. I would always ask about the amount of time they've got. So if you have all the time in the world and you want to carry on stretching, then fine. If you like it and it's not causing you any discomfort, and and you feel that it's beneficial as well, then carry on. But if your time is very limited and you've got a choice between stretching and something else, then it's probably going to be the something else. And especially if it's loading the tissue, because I usually deal with athletes in the clinic, and that's where I would guide their time, and quite often as well, they're quite relieved that they don't have to stretch anymore, and because they've been told that they have to do it and they must do their stretches, and they've been religious about their stretches, and they've noticed no change in their symptoms or their they've had their issues for a long time, and then as soon as you start to then load it, everything changes, and they can see like pretty much straight away the difference in how they feel and how they perform when they just switch the focus from stretching into loading. It's and then I don't have to do that anymore. Well, they can do if they want, but they know it's not. It's like you said, it's not harmful, but it's not very beneficial.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
There was
Yeah.
sorry, mate. Another question by Claire. I was on a course recently that said if you stretch, you should only be holding for 10 to 15 seconds. If you want to work on flexibility, then hold for at least 30 seconds. This was a running course and advised against flexibility for runners, but doing stretching only.
Oh,
Okay.
slightly contradicted yourself in the last bit there, Claire.
Yeah.
I'm sure you didn't mean to, but just created a bit of confusion when we read that. So a running course that advised against flexibility. I've seen a lot of running related, blogs and so on, speaking against flexibility, or should I say against stretching for runners. But then it says, but doing stretching only. So is it a little bit confused there? So
unless it's the increase in range, maybe. So increase in range of motion, because you don't want to have too much range. You want a lot of muscle and tendon stiffness when you're running. Maybe that's it.
That's what they're talking about. And also, Mike, I'm not sure if there's a huge difference between stretching for say 15 seconds and 30 seconds. Obviously, the longer you stretch, the more you're going to get some adaptation, although that adaptation is very slow. But I think that the regularity of how much you stretch is probably more important than how long you do it for or on each sitting. So doing it daily or 2 or 3 times a day would be much more effective than just doing it for 30 seconds once a day.
Definitely. I think the changes there would be very minimal. I've got a paper here. So it's a chap called Freitas. So 8-week high intensity stretching training on biceps femoris, so one of the hamstring muscles, and they did stretching for 450 seconds at a time, and so they really went for it. And that showed significant increases in architectural changes. It was a 12.3 millimeter difference, and big changes in range of motion. However, when they stopped doing it, the range of motion soon went back to baseline. So even holding it for that long and having those architectural changes, the architectural changes don't necessarily mean you're going to get an increase in range forever. You may during that session, but it may not change forever, or for a long period of time.
Unless you either keep doing it or you use that range of motion. I mean, if it's, I would argue it's not really a very functional range. If it restores back to normal, it implies that you're not using that range. So therefore you don't really need it either.
I think because I was listening to Greg Lehman, because he did a study, because he wanted he was saying that to get his paper published, he wanted to have a really, really long period of stretching, because if there was going to be any difference, then it's got to be in those long periods of time. And he got golfers, I think, to stretch for 2.5 minutes, something like that, and then measure the spinal kinematics of their golf swing. And he said they got them to do it regulated over a period of time, and nothing changed.
Really?
There was no change at all. And he was gutted.
Oh gosh.
But that's the thing. I mean, sometimes it does have a difference, but then he was looking at spinal kinematics, so maybe the different areas of the body respond differently to different lengths of stretching, different types of stretching.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some great questions coming through. Claire just commented again. Claire, sorry if we didn't fully answer your question. You mentioned about they were quite strict on holding it for 10 to 15 seconds. No real comment there. They were just doing that for in a rather dogmatic way, perhaps, just because that's the way that they've done it, rather than that's proven for a certain reason. So no particular comment on that one. Then reciprocal inhibition. So that's the contract relax technique, the PNF idea, where you can dampen down the stretch reflex and also get the contraction of the antagonist muscle in order to try and bring about some relaxation in the agonist. What it's really doing, and I know this isn't as detailed as you might like, Kelly, is it's monkeying around with the reflexes of the nervous system in order to bring about some rather quick changes in the apparent extensibility of the soft tissue, which is already there, but you're just tricking the nervous system into getting some quite swift gains in increasing that range of motion, which can be very effective if you just look purely at increased range. However, if it's not a very functional increase in range, then as Mike was talking about earlier, it can soon, Mike was talking more about structural changes, but neurological changes will soon go back to normal, unless of course you're using that range through more dynamic exercise, more repeated exercise, and the tasks that you're doing as well. But it can be a quick way of increasing range of motion. And we haven't talked about pain, but I find in clinic it can also be a rather helpful way of reducing pain from various pathologies as well. It's quick, it's easy, it's not that fancy, it's not that sexy a technique, but it does work really well and is definitely worth trying. And of course, it's something you can teach and show to patients as well. Bonnie mentioned about propulsion. So yeah, absolutely, Bonnie. So, as Mike said, you want more spring and more stiffness in your step. And when you look at the theory of just passive stretching, that's not really looking to achieve that as well. And Poppy mentioned about warming up and cooling down, and said that during a warm-up session, commented it was a waste. An article said it was a waste of time warming up and cooling down. Okay. So it's a good one. Really, it depends what warming up it's about. I think getting ready for activity is important. I think if you're going to go for a run and you're doing lots of sitting still passive stretching, then that's not really warming up, because it's not really very relevant to the activity that you're about to go and do. Yeah. The classic one is you see people doing a posterior, this one, posterior shoulder stretch before they go for a run. Before they go for a run, which I love. It's absolutely brilliant because it's completely irrelevant on many levels.
I run like this though, so it works for me.
We'll cover that in our next webinar. So yeah, I think when you're warming up, you're gonna just need to prepare yourself both physically and mentally for what it is you're about to do. I mean, imagine if you just got out of bed and you're going to go and you're going to go to play a game of football. You would need to warm up. You would need to wake up. You'd need to get your body going. You might need to do a bit of stretching and get your spine moving and everything. I know I certainly would. However, if you're already up and you've been moving and your body's warm, and your mind switched on, then warming up becomes potentially a much shorter a thing that takes much less time. So it really depends on what state you're in at that time before you go and do the sport. It depends on what you're going to go and do. If you're going for a jog, well, that almost counts to warm up because you can just start jogging. But if you're going to go and participate in a sprint, then that takes much more of a careful warm up to prepare for that. And we saw how in the Olympics, Usain Bolt had some issues with his warm up, didn't he? Because there was a delay in him starting, and he'd done all of his warm up, and then there was just this massive delay before his event. And I can't remember. He didn't do so as well as he wanted. He pulled a muscle, I think, but it was because there was this disruption to his normal warm up routine, and he'd warmed up but then cooled down again, and his body wasn't as prepared as it should have been.
Yeah, maybe the mind as well with that, because that's going to mess with your head, isn't it? If you've got a routine before a race and then that routine is broken, that's it's not good mentally either.
Yeah.
Let's just see if we got so better to warm up before static stretching.
No.
If I was doing a warm up for something, right?
Hang on.
Let's go for gym work. So if I'm going to do a training session in the gym, I would do whatever training session I'm going to do in the gym, but just lighter. And I would do whatever movements I'm going to do. I would do all of those movements as my warm up. I wouldn't then stop and stretch and then go into my main routine. No. I would so I don't know. Let's say it's squats. So I would start off with the bar, go through range of motion, and then I would just put the weights on gradually until I reach whatever weight it was I was lifting. I think you warm up, you mobilize by doing the movements that you're going to do in that session.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. But then I wondered if the question was more geared at if you were going to static stretch because you wanted to static stretch because it was part of your program, then it would make sense to do that when you were warm, and it would make sense to do that at the end of your session. If static stretching was something you wanted to focus on, then yes, you would want to have finished your the intense elements of the exercise before you did that.
Yeah.
All right. So I know we haven't got to everybody's questions. I apologize. And thanks for joining us tonight. It's been really, really popular. Mike, how are you feeling now? Do you want to start to wrap up?
Yeah, I think that didn't go too bad, did it? That was okay. I was a bit, I was a bit worried about what was going to come out. I think to summarize for me, I think if somebody likes stretching, then fine. If you're limited with time, then there are probably other options that are more beneficial, that bring more bang for your buck than doing static stretching. That's what I would say.
Yeah. And I think static stretching has a very limited part to play in general physical rehabilitation from injuries. I say limited part to play because I do believe in some cases it can have a part to play, and there's an individual preference for that as well, but a limited part to play. And hopefully now a lot of people are not left excessively stretching and not getting very far with their rehabilitation.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Dan. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Mike. You too.
Take care. Thank you,
I'll
everyone.
Speak to you in the week.
Yeah, really
Thanks,
good
guys.
questions. Cheers, guys.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.